Welcome back, Beyond Rome listeners and Philos Catholic friends and family. We are excited today. I'm speaking on behalf of my co-host, James O'Reilly, and I, to have one of our newest Philos employees and colleagues with us, Phil Dolitsky. Phil, welcome to Beyond Rome.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We're so happy to have you at Philos and so happy to enjoy you at Philos Catholic and also in our lives. And you are our new National Security Fellow. So Phil, can you tell us a little bit about what that means and who you are? But don't say too much because I'm going to interview the both of you today. So yes, today James is not hosting. Today I'm interviewing James. And
I'm in the back seat. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm driving this podcast. So Phil, real quick about what that means to be a National Security Fellow and where you're from.
Sure. Phil from Philly, born and raised. Now am living in Maryland in Baltimore. Joined the Philos Project as a National Security Fellow to do work about national security issues related to the Middle East, the ongoing war in Israel, and just some long-term national security concerns that I think affect all of us. So I'm excited to do this really important work here at the Philos team, the Philos Project. It's been wonderful to join and looking forward to our conversation today.
So excited to have both of you. Okay, so the idea behind this podcast is both of you are young men, Gen Zers in your mid-20s, and both of you are Orthodox, but in different ways. So James, you're an Orthodox Catholic, and Phil from Philly, you're an Orthodox Jewish man. So I want to just begin by asking, what does it mean to be an Orthodox Catholic and Orthodox Jew? What does that mean?
Phil, do you want to start?
Yeah.
Sure. So I to be an Orthodox Jew means that I kind of follow normative religious practice, religious law, what we call halacha, the code of Jewish law, and it means that I, keep the Sabbath from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, keep the laws of kosher, the dietary restrictions, pray 3 times a day. It just kind of means I live my life according to the Torah, to the Bible, and it's been a journey that I am proud to have traversed, and it's really special, honestly, to consider myself an Orthodox Jew.
It's been special getting to know you and your Orthodox Jewish faith. That has been I've been kind of jealous because when you say you're unplugging, you're actually unplugging for the Sabbath. And anybody who's listened to me for anything at any time knows that I love the Sabbath and want Christians to embrace it as Orthodox Jews do. So Phil, how old were you when you decided you weren't going to leave Judaism? You were going to do it for real as it was given to you?
Sure. So my religious journey is not too dissimilar from many of my fellow Russian friends whose families came here in the mid 70s and 80s following both the Holocaust and then the Soviet regime. So I grew up with a very strong Jewish identity, but I wasn't practicing Orthodox Judaism until later in life. Just the classic case of when my great-grandparents came to the United States. It was one of those situations where if you don't work on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Sunday. And I'd always known that. I had always known that was an unfortunate compromise that my family made to provide for us a better life than what we had in the past. And then, growing up, I was always, in synagogue on the high holidays, and we kept, Shabbat in our own kind of way. And then I became more involved in my religious identity in high school. I went to Jewish schools my whole life, but in high school is when I really became Orthodox, started keeping Shabbat and praying more and learning more. Followed that up with Yeshiva, a religious seminary in Israel, for a year. Yeshiva University, continued my education there. Yeah, that's the quick journey.
So you're more Orthodox Jewish than your parents then?
So they actually we all became kind of Orthodox together, actually, as a family.
Through you, correct?
Through me, yeah,
Okay.
indeed.
Yeah, that happened. That's kind of I love when that happens. When the kids kind of bring the parents back. I don't think my mom and dad listen to this, but I think that my sister and I kind of did that for my parents as well in a Catholic context. So yeah, it's really neat. They give you something and then you give it back to them in a deeper way. How neat. James, you too. I mean, you're
Mm-hmm.
an Orthodox Catholic. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, just to separate on the podcast here, we talk about, Orthodox Christians. I'm not Orthodox, of course. It's just Orthodox Roman Catholic, you could say, or
Mhm.
Latin Catholic. So yeah, I guess you'd say I'm a traditional Catholic, and I'm proud of that. And that entails a lot of traditions, the passing down of what I believe is church teaching through the papacy, through the magisterium. But it's not just the big T traditions, the doctrines and the beliefs of the church. I think it also is much more broader and richer than that. Entails a way of life that's embodied. Hopefully, we're actually embodying what we believe and what's passed down to us from the church. But it's also small T traditions, things passed on through my family, my community, that really kind of enrich that greater tradition even more. So, in my own case, it's a long line of Irish Catholicism. A lot of my grandparents in Ireland were teachers, so very well catechized, had a deep understanding of their faith that was both lived but also understood, and in a way that they were able to express it in beautiful ways. So yeah, it's traditional Catholicism is a deep resource for just living out your faith in a deep way, and I think it's deeply connected to um, what we talk about a lot in this podcast with our Hebraic and Near Eastern Christian roots. It was actually through my Catholic faith and studying at Christendom College. I think it was really entering into that tradition that I came to have a deeper appreciation for the Jewish roots of Catholicism in a deeply meaningful way that wasn't just like, yeah, Jesus was a Jew kind of thing. It was like, no, there's so much to this where, all of a sudden I realized the way traditional churches are built was based on, the first and second temple, on the creation narrative, all those things, the sacraments all have roots in the Old Testament and Hebraic traditions. So yeah, it was, people might think, Catholic Jewish relations getting to that space, it's, liberal and just la di da. But for me, it was actually really entering into my traditions and the tradition of the faith that I came to this deep appreciation for and understanding of uh, my faith, but where it fits within the grand story of salvation history as well. And of course, that's what ended up bringing me to having friendships with the Jewish people, having friendships with Phil in this case too. So yeah, it's a long way of saying that's what traditional Catholicism, Orthodox Catholicism, is for me, and how it's affected my life.
I love that, and I think I don't like labels, of course, but they're helpful, and they provide categories for thought that are helpful, even though I don't like them, because I think both of you would agree with me when you say that you're like an Orthodox Jew, an Orthodox Catholic, or a traditional Catholic, or a traditional Jew, that like you're living out the like most radical, full, complete expression of
Hopefully, yeah.
of the faith. So yeah, but you could just say that being a traditional Catholic or an Orthodox Catholic is just being what it means to be a Catholic. And Phil, would you say that about Orthodox Judaism?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I figured. So, okay. And then James, really quick before we move on to this
Mm-hmm.
second portion of this podcast, how old were you when you were like, yeah, I'm gonna keep doing this, Catholic
Um,
thing?
yeah, I mean, I grew up cradle Catholic, and it was always traditional Catholicism too. Keeping the sacraments, going to confession on a regular basis, going to not just Sunday Mass, but going to daily Mass a lot of the time. So I don't know. I think people in their own faith stories like to have the big dramatic moments, but for me, it's been more a process of continuing to grow and learn. And I'm sure there will be great challenges in the future for me.
Yeah.
But I think it was through my time at Christendom, um, through probably like second or third year, where I really came to fall in love with my faith in a more deep, abiding way that wasn't just sentiment and feeling. And this is what I grew up with. Is like, okay, a rational understanding of this is something very good and true, and I do believe it. But then you spend the rest of your life coming to know In the Catholic case, no Christ, no Jesus in a deeper, more intimate way. So yeah, I've certainly reached that point where I can only hope and pray that I continue to pursue that.
You don't go off track. Well, I love riding car with you because I don't have to ask you if you want to pray a rosary. You suggest it first, and I'm like, that's so nice. I don't have to be the like more intense religious one for a while.
That's just with my Catholic conscience, Catholic guilt. If I don't pray my rosary every day, I'm going to go to hell.
I just it's nice. I don't have to suggest it. Like you're like a grown man. It's like nice when it comes from a male.
Right.
All right. So both of you are living, at least from the standpoint of like the secular world, which is becoming more and more secular and more pagan. You're both living like actually very radical, countercultural lives by living this religious life. So what would you say as like young Gen Z guys, especially in this like very secular culture, are like the biggest struggles with living out your faith?
Want to take that one, James, and I'll follow up?
Yeah. The biggest struggles. Again, it's one of those things where I've been very spoiled and blessed in my life because I've grew up in that tight-knit Catholic community that despite being like
around
in the secular world, there was this space where we could actually live it in a very full expression. So it's been more, I guess, in the last couple of years, more like getting into the Near East space, getting into Catholic Jewish relations, and engaging just with other faiths as well. And then, of course, the secular world. I grew up doing competitive Irish dancing. That's actually tends to be a very liberal world. So I had a lot of engagement there. And I don't know, I wouldn't say struggles, because I think I always had a deep appreciation for my faith. So I could see the good that came out of it. And it was more, any struggles would have been maybe more immature, like being younger. And, there were reasons, you didn't get a phone earlier in your life because our parents were, trying to not keep us, safe from the big bad world, but it's more like, no, just live your life, be present in the moment kind of thing. So those struggles are there, but I've never had, it's not like I have strong inclinations to just go carousing and hook up with girls and do drugs and all of those things. Because I think, I don't know, it's since I've always lived in a way that my faith was important to me, those things, if they were ever appealing, it was probably just like a darker moment in my life. But I don't know, again, maybe this is just like the spoiled Catholic kid in me, but
that's what you get for being from a healthy family of 14 kids. And a community where you're running around in the Shire of Front Royal and you're reading books, and it's when you have all those transcending goods, it just, and you're formed in a certain way. I can see why the like kind of the glamour of evil, as we say, is not as glamorous.
Right.
So that is actually really, really lovely to hear, because the way that you're living is insane to most Americans and crazy. I mean, wealth, pleasure, power, honor, all those things that the world seek after, they don't really hold power over you. So Phil, what about you? I mean, like, this is, you've got the additional layer of being Jewish, which is like a whole other layer of like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I'll take a different perspective on this. I think one of the great Hasidic rabbis once said, a fairly modern Hasidic rabbi, because otherwise the analogy doesn't work, that if you have someone who's hooked up in the hospital, he's alive if the graph looks like it's going up and down, and he's dead if it's a flat line. Life is those ups and downs, and yeah, I certainly have had those moments of doubt of in the face of a world that thinks I'm crazy for being faithful in an Orthodox Jew. What am I doing? It causes those moments of doubt. And I'll say that in a few ways. First, of course, is the really, I think, difficult perspective that anti-Semitism adds to this entire question. Right? It's not merely that Judaism asks a bunch of normative things from me, but it's being an Orthodox Jew, one who wears his yarmulke out in public. There are people who hate me just by dint of that faith, and
it's kind of what I meant by that other layer.
And you know, especially after the I think it was always there, the anti-Semitism that erupted after October 7th, but you know, I had admittedly more than one moment in the aftermath of 10/7 of saying, like, I just don't like being hated for, you know, by dint of that just by dint of my faith. But you know, at least on that front, I try to gain some, you know, perspective and inspiration from my family and the people who survived persecution. And my namesake, you know, not only survived. His story is a story I'll one day tell the world. You know, not only survived the Holocaust and was personally smacked by Eichmann in a camp for some active disobedience, but survived, you know, the Soviet Union and totalitarianism there, and somehow he remained throughout his entire life, you know, an Orthodox committed Jew. And you know, I remember that even in my darkest moments, you know, somehow my great grandfather persevered. So that's, you know, from that perspective. And then from the perspective of just kind of the secular world is enticing. I'm often reminded of a line in a short story by Dostoevsky where his protagonist says, you know, and then I stopped caring and all my problems went away. And sometimes I think about that, you know, if I stopped caring about, you know, strict observance of the halacha, of the Jewish law, will all my problems go away? And I think life does a very good job at reminding me that they won't, and that there's something about my faith that propels me through those problems and through those dark days. So it's certainly a struggle, and I'll admit on this podcast that it is a struggle. But I'm glad that my faith has survived those struggles.
I knew I could depend on you, Phil, to bring up Dostoevsky at some point.
I was gonna say, you see this, all this beauty.
Simone, if I could hop in, it is interesting because I talk about my experience. Of course, mine is a unique one, even among Catholics, because there are plenty of Catholics who, you know, grew up in a very different space, and they might feel more difficulty in living in a secular world. But it is interesting coming from the space I did, where, you know, yes, you will be hated for being a Christian, for being united with Christ, but there is something very apparent about getting to the space, the Jewish space, where I start to care about this stuff, and I can feel the hate so much more apparently, in a way where I'm not even Jewish, but I start to, you know, there's a sense of solidarity with the Jewish people, and people kind of get upset about that. So I felt a much more like vitriolic, apparent hatred for something that I'm not even, but the fact that I would even become, you know, engaged or care about it. So in Phil's case here, it's that added layer is actually not just a small layer. It's something huge that I feel like I've come to realize. You know, and they speak about it, the effect, like anti-Semitism is a canary in a coal mine. So that hatred, I think, is something that it's the same hatred, or there is something similar to it that is the hatred of being Christian too. But I think it's important for people to know that in my case as a Catholic, yes, I've been like, you're going to be hated for your faith, but for the sake of just being Jewish, you don't even have to like live out your faith in a very radical Orthodox way, and you'll still be hated just for walking out the door, is something that I think a lot of Catholics don't get.
You just answered the question I was going to ask, which is, what do you wish people knew that they maybe don't know? So thanks for answering that before I even asked it, James.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And Phil now.
Yeah, I was going to say, now Phil can answer, because I think for me, what breaks my heart is along those lines, not just because like, oh my gosh, Jew hatred leads to Christian hatred. Like, it's very practical. It's very true. But I feel like when I meet Christians that don't understand or don't feel, I want feelings, and Bill, you're an INFP. James, you're an IFJ. I'm an ENFP. So there's a bunch of intuitive feelers around here that
that Phil and I don't appreciate that, our personality types were just broadcasted to the world.
I'm in charge of this podcast. I know. Hey, those are great personality types. Great. But you're more than the Myers-Briggs. Okay. Yes, you're unrepeatable, unique creatures beyond 16 categories. But I what breaks my heart is the not feeling the pain of how our Jewish brothers and sisters feel, and also to feel not just with them, but feel as part of them. That's what kills me, because that to me is what a Christian ought to feel like. Wow, like when Phil suffers, it's me suffering too. And that to me is what I want more than just like, okay, they're coming after me next. Like, but actually they already are after me if they're after Phil. So Phil, what again, this doesn't have to be related to anti-Semitism, but like what kind of breaks your heart about the world as a religious person?
Oh, well, it could be several seasons worth of a podcast about that. But I will say, before I answer that, I will say that what was so touching to me in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, the few people who immediately, like on October 8th, had called to check up on me were some of my dearest Catholic friends. Immediately called to ask how I was doing and offer their support and encouragement. And that was still to this day one of the most touching things that ever happened. And those individuals, I think, felt my pain viscerally, and then also knew that it won't stop just with the Jewish people. What do I wish people would know about me and living my faith? I think,
or just even like think about it like this, like what would you say to maybe a Jewish guy listening to this podcast somehow, like that's thinking about becoming more religious, or like the young man that I met this weekend, James, that just 25-year-old just became a Catholic, wasn't really given much religious. Like, what do you want them to know, or what breaks your heart about what they don't know that they're missing out on by not being religious?
What's the secret knowledge that you have, Phil?
Yeah. I think we all need an antidote to chaos, and whatever that antidote is has to move you tectonically. And even though I consider my first love to be music and my mistress to be great literature, I think ultimately the only thing that I know reliably, even amidst those struggles, that I can rely on is my faith, and in particular the love that I feel from God and from my community. And I say that even when he and I are not talking for a day or so. To quote another Hasidic rabbi, there's nothing more whole than a broken heart, and because a broken heart is indicative of a relationship that has to be there. And I think we live by the love. I think we live by the love of other people, and also by the love of God. And if I didn't feel that, I don't know that I would have a better antidote to the chaos of the world. So that's what I think I would say. That's the secret sauce. There has to be some antidote, and
so good.
Yeah, that's what it is for me.
Amazing. Okay, so on to Jewish Catholic relations. Okay, so like on paper, and we're filming this actually on the anniversary of Nostra Aetate, which is really kind of cool. Won't be released today, obviously, but kind of fun that we're filming it today. I get kind of annoyed by that phrase, Jewish Catholic relations, because it sounds so institutional and so
platonic.
Yeah, and cold, just so cold. But you two are friends in real life, and we've talked off record, obviously, as friends about like the grass is always greener. Like Catholics in our circles are like, oh, we're so annoying when we do X, Y, Z, and Phil's like, I have my own complaints too about my community, and we're like, no, don't tell us that everything's perfect for everything else. But what is because I always when I was younger, my closest friends in high school and college were actually not devout Catholics. I didn't really know that many devout Catholics, to be honest, but I did know devout Jews, and also a devout Hindu girl and a devout Muslim girl. And we were all close because we were just serious about our faith. And obviously a Hindu and a Muslim and Jewish people, like totally Christian, me, a Catholic, is totally different, but we were really close because we shared the same values and we believed in truth. And relativism was like a new thing back when I was in college. Like, what is this intellectual trend going around that everybody's really into these days? Like, that was nonsense to us. So just by virtue of holding our religious convictions, which were different, that brought us together as good friends. So yeah, just I would love to hear as we wrap up this podcast. What bonds you as friends, and yeah, what is it that you share, even if you don't share the particularities of your faith traditions? What brings you together as friends, as authentic friends? Because that, to me, Jewish Catholic relations is kind of a funny phrase, because we're just it's something much more real than just that.
Right. I don't know, Phil. I feel like it reminds me of the C.S. Lewis quote where friendship starts in that moment where you go, you too, kind of thing. And I feel like the first time we met up for coffee, I think it's been less than a year, but it felt like that kind of moment where we met and didn't know what to expect, but then you start talking. It's like, oh, okay, you too. Like, there's this kind of surprise. Like, you enjoy a lot of the same things, but it's not even just enjoying the same things. It's also, I think, a certain disposition that we both share, which is just a love of learning new things, of an appreciation for a lot of the same things. Of course, I don't have the same deep and refined sense of high culture like you do when it comes to music and certain forms of art. But it doesn't even have to. I mean, I think there's the religious conviction too. It's that search for God that I think you and I perhaps do in a similar way too, where you're within an Orthodox Jewish community. I come from a traditional Catholic community where there's plenty of that, but then I think there's this desire to go out and discover something outside as well, not in like a bad way because we're rejecting the faith or anything, but because there's just such a richness to life to explore. And I think we're both also just deeply melancholic. So even beyond just like the big like religious affairs and Catholic Jewish relations, I think there's just an affinity just as person to person. And I think that's something a lot of people just miss out on because they just hear Catholic Jewish relations and they just think like the Jews, and the Jews to them are these, the Hasidic Jews in Jerusalem with their big fur hats who hate Christians. But Catholic Jewish relations takes on a whole new turn when it's actually, I think, Catholic Jewish relations. And I think, no, my friendship with Phil and the things he cares about and his faith is deeply important to him, and it's informed so much of who he is. That's what Catholic Jewish relations is. Really, it's more about friendship as opposed to the Pope and the head rabbi of Rome getting together and shaking hands. As important as that is, there has to be a more holistic approach, maybe more grassroots. I don't know. That would be my response to that.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. And yeah, this friendship is one that I'm blessed to have. I'll say I was reflecting on this. I had imagined Simone would ask us this question, and I was thinking about this last night. That you and I mean, the three of us, I think we would all acknowledge that we disagree on some fairly big questions. Matters relating to the divine, and yet, despite how large, if you will, those disagreements are, how little they actually matter into our relationships, and yet, I think all of us are in full acknowledgement of the fact that the other is a religious person. I interact with both of you as other religious people, and I think that the fact that we are practicing, religious people, albeit different religions, that fact I think shows up in our relationship all the time, which is something very cool. It's something that I always recognize, and yeah, I think, that there are issues related to human flourishing and the good of mankind that we're all passionate about, and that we all can talk about and have a really beautiful friendship kind of thrive off of that shared interest. And I think, by the way, in terms of kind of the quote unquote institutional Jewish Christian relations, I think there's a lot of room for improvement in this regard. For instance, I think the Catholic world in particular is very good at grassroots advocacy and of changing policy in Washington, D.C. on issues that religious Jews care deeply about as well. And I'd love to see further engagement with the Jewish people, into those spaces that you guys are already ahead of the game with. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think also on the personal level, I don't know, I love the expression cradle Catholic. I was certainly not a cradle Orthodox Jew in the sense that I didn't grow up, on a Jewish block with Jewish neighbors. And leaving Yeshiva University, going to grad school, and then working in the DC space was kind of my first exposure to friends and coworkers who were about the same age as I am and who were practicing Catholics. And it was culture shock, to be sure, but it was also one of the most enlightening experiences of my life. And I consider James one of my best friends, and it's
yes,
yeah, that's right. And there's something. Yeah, I think too many people have too few interactions of the kind that the three of us have with each other.
Totally.
And ultimately despair melts in community. And I think any pernicious thoughts you have about the other, whatever the capital O other is, melts in meeting the other. And it's been truly the opportunity of a lifetime to be part of the Philos team and to have these interactions on a regular basis.
No, amazing, Phil. Yeah, definitely share all those sentiments. I always think it's such a paradox, and I said this just a few minutes ago, that it wasn't so much about the particularities of the religious conviction, but the fact that there was conviction and belief. That is what bonded us in friendship. And like freedom, actually. This like wishy-washy kind of like, I don't know, fake ecumenical whatever is not actually what brings people together. The freedom to be yourself in front of someone and all of its orthodox, radical tradition.
Right. Well, and the beauty about the relationship between, Simone, you and I, and then Phil, or just among us at Philos, is any sort of disagreement that there might be about some of the bigger questions, or all the things you might agree with, all of it starts from a place of friendship, which is just going to be a much better place to start with on anything. So when it comes to contentious or differences, I can't imagine a world where people would argue that it's better not to start from a place of friendship on especially the tougher questions too.
It doesn't feel like the disagreements are even disagreements just because of the intimacy of the friendship. And friendship's not the sort of thing you can force.
Right.
It truly is a gift. And the gift that it has been in my life with the two of you and at Philos has been really life-giving.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a realization too that each of us personally has misconceptions or preconceptions about like certain different groups. So even among like Catholics and Protestants, not even just Catholics and Jews, there's this, this expectation that they know more than they do. And then you go and it's like, oh, wow, maybe they just don't know that much about my faith and I don't know that much about their faith kind of thing. So it goes both ways, where Phil, you spoke about being kind of an enlightenment meeting practicing Catholics. And in my case, I think people like me, practicing Catholics who met you, would be like, oh, wow, okay, here's an Orthodox Jew who isn't, the stuck up type who like hates everybody. And it's like, here's this wonderful, thoughtful person. So it just goes both ways, where it's like you have your misconceptions, preconceptions, but you also take for granted the other side maybe doesn't either. And you can't expect them to know until you actually engage in that healthy way, and ideally from a place of friendship too.
Yeah. I mean, I think you had mentioned C.S. Lewis before. That one of my favorite C.S. Lewis quotes is that, the whole end of education is for friends to spend an evening, smoking cigars, drinking whiskey, talking about books and poetry. And people should know that, I think at any free moment I have with James, I will ask him something about, the church that I was always curious about. And I know he does the same as well about things in Orthodox Judaism. And that's very cool. We're always learning, we're always interested, we're always curious, and respectful of that curiosity and engagement is a uniquely beautiful thing. And it's something that we should encourage. And I think that, people ask me all the time, what can we do to stop at anti-Semitism? And I think it's create meaningful friendships with your local Jewish community, and to show that despite whatever major differences you have, that there's actually a lot more that holds you both together than actually separates you.
Yes, and we actually say that on paper, like on paper we agree with that. Now it's just getting out there and living it. I think I've always had just close Jewish friends, so that, like what happened in the last year or so has been like such a learning curve for me, because I never would have imagined in certain corners of the church this being a problem, which I still hate saying out loud, because for me it's a completely foreign experience. So I don't know if that brings you consolation or desolation, Phil, but for me it was a shock, like an absolute shock.
Well, I'll add to that. I think, I had mentioned earlier that I'm first generation American. Everyone comes from the Soviet Union, and I think I mentioned this to you, Simone, just how our immigrant stories relate a little bit.
Yeah.
I never grew up with the sense that the people who did, wrong to my family or my people were Christians, or were non-Jews. I always had this deep hatred of totalitarianism and of fascism and of evil run amok. And, I didn't grow up on a Jewish block, and so I played with my neighbors Joey and Ryan, who were Christian, and that was just kind of how
Joey and Ryan, classic.
Where else did you go play ball? After school, you went to Joey and Ryan's house across the street, and I think that both how my family framed our immigrant story as one of repulsion from of fascism and totalitarianism, and not one of people whose religion was different than mine, I think really did a number on me in terms of viewing my co-religionists, as people worthy of respect and of people who I can have a real friendship with. I attribute a lot of that to my family's way that I was raised.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay, final question for Phil, but also James, you can answer it too. What has been the most, this is a genuine question because I don't think I've asked you this. What has been the most surprising thing that you've learned about Catholics recently? And then James, if you want to answer it, if you have an answer the other way around.
This might be skewed by my exposure being to you two and to some of our other colleagues. I'm amazed at both the amount of knowledge you all have about history and doctrine. And I sometimes, whenever I speak to the two of you, I think I'm getting an encyclopedia responding to me, which is honestly very inspiring. I'm truly in awe of the way that your institutions do education. And it's really inspiring. And I tell my friends about this, that somehow the educational world of my Catholic friends is really inspiring. And the fact that you could also, again, and maybe it's just I'm biased with the two guests on here now, the fact that you could be so knowledgeable and so thirsty for the divine, and yet also have a thirst for poetry and for music and for beauty in all its forms, was something I don't think I would have imagined I would see when I came into close contact with devout Catholics. But it has been the coolest thing I've learned about you guys and your community.
Amazing. Thank you, Phil. That's so nice.
Thank you.
So awesome.
I don't know if I have, it would go the same way where it would be more biased towards looking at it through my relationship with you, Phil. But something within the Jewish community too. Simone, I can't remember if the question was if it was something we learned recently.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned about Judaism and Jews since you started working in this space? I remember Rabbi Mark Gottlieb at the Franciscan conference, just like asking me a question that was so framed in like Catholic categories. I was like, wow, like you do get my weird little world. Like the way he asked, I'm like, you know what you're talking about. And it just didn't expect that from him.
He's someone,
and he's besties with John Crosby at the Hildebrand Project. So they're the Phil and James at Franciscan. But anyway, it was really impressive.
Yeah, no, I've met Rabbi Gottlieb as well, and I remember driving him to the airport from our Franciscan conference last year, and him and I were just talking about Catholic novelists the whole way there, people like Evelyn Waugh, Graham Greene, because I think he loves a lot of those books. So that was great. Something I wouldn't say surprised, but something I've come to just see more is just among the Jewish community is that deep appreciation for community and family. And it doesn't even have like maybe less so with the less religious, but I think there's still this deep abiding sense that's the love of the family and that community and the way of living it out too. And in a joyful way too, because I think you get like this again is a stereotype where, the Jews are just following commandments and it's this kind of joyless pursuit. But even just going to Shabbat dinners, when we go on trips, and we've taken the Dominican friars, taken North American college seminarians, and we would go to Shabbat meals. But there's this joy from the families that we would be with, and they would be, Orthodox, observant. And it was this, in so many ways, it reminded me of just like a traditional Catholic family where there's a lot of kids and there's this joy among the kids too. I mean, they're just well-behaved kids, but they're also just joyful as well. So just on a human level, caring about like family values, all of that was something that I guess again, it's not a surprise, but it was just this beautiful thing to see where it felt so familiar in a lot of ways, which is beautiful.
Yeah, the familiarity. I love that. Thank you both for doing this interview. I'm really looking forward to releasing it. We could just keep talking forever as we do. But any final thoughts or comments before we say goodbye?
Oh, it was a pleasure getting to chat. This was a real treat for me.
Thank you, Phil.
Likewise.
All right. Until next time. Bye.
If this episode was helpful for you, please consider sharing it with a friend, leaving a rating and review to help us spread the word, and donating at philosproject.org/give with the comment Catholic to support this podcast. To learn more about becoming a Christian leader in the Near East, check out our Pathfinder free online courses, also on our website. Thanks for listening. See you next week.